Jim Knowles makes his return to Columbus on Saturday when Penn State faces Ohio State. Ohio State replaced Jim Knowles with Matt Patricia after Knowles left to go home to coach at Penn State as their new defensive coordinator after 3 years with the Buckeyes. Ryan Day, head coach of the Buckeyes, got asked, "Hey, what's been your relationship with Jim Knowles since he left here?" And he said, "They have none. They have not talked since he left." It was he said it was abrupt the way he left Stefan. I guess let's start here. This is going to be a longer video. I'm telling you guys that right now. We kind of lived it a little bit, the Jim Knowles departure. Not kind of, we were literally living it. What did you think of Jim Knowles' departure and just like the way things played out from the moment that kind of like the little flutters were out there that maybe Jim Knowles wouldn't be back in Columbus to him actually leaving Columbus?
Yeah, it all went kind of from 0 to 100 pretty quickly, right? Because I remember there was some initial reports. I think the first report was, and I don't want to say in case I get who it was wrong, but there was reports of him having some interest in the Oklahoma defensive coordinator job. At that point, Venables was looking for a defensive coordinator, and it kind of caught everyone by surprise. Like, oh, okay, like no one had really talked to that point about Jim Knowles leaving. It was the middle of the playoff run. I'm pretty sure that was at the Cotton Bowl, maybe going into the national championship game where that had come up. Like, it was kind of out of nowhere, right? And then the Notre Dame defensive coordinator job was open, and the Penn State defensive coordinator job was open. You kept hearing Knowles' name come up more and more, and I think the three of us started thinking, like, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is something to the potential of Jim Knowles leaving. And then, like, so that process, it went from like 0 to 75, and then 75 to 100 happened like that, when it was like national titles over and the offseason began immediately in terms of the portal, but also in terms of Jim Knowles being a serious contender for the Penn State job. Everyone knew about his local ties, right, being from Philadelphia and things of that nature, that maybe there was a possibility that he would want the Penn State job. And then we go to Ohio Stadium. I think it was maybe like a week after, like 6 days. Yeah, like the Sunday after national championship game. So the game was on a Monday. Like 6 days later, we're at the celebration at Ohio Stadium, and Jim Knowles isn't there. And we're like, oh, this is going to happen. And we're literally in the press box after the celebration ends, and news breaks that Jim Knowles is leaving for Penn State, right? That became, it was kind of obvious, like, okay, the moment the celebration ends, there's going to be some breaking news. Like, it came across, everyone's timeline pretty quickly after that. So that's kind of what I remember from it. It's just like it happened so quick. And then as Day referred to, as we were talking to him today, like, Ohio State was in an awkward spot in terms of the coaching cycle, right? Because, like, head coaches come and go. Usually the coaches that are getting fired or leave right after Thanksgiving, right after rivalry week, because their teams aren't playing into the postseason. And that's when a lot of moves happen, right? A head coach comes in, okay, this is going to be my defense coordinator, my offensive coordinator. You start to connect the dots, and everyone's going everywhere. And then it's late January, and Ohio State's like the best coordinator opening in the country. It's open right now, and everything else is full. And I remember other names coming up kind of along the search. We thought maybe Matt Guerrieri would get promoted. And then it's Matt Patricia that comes in. Everyone's like, oh, that's kind of a name from out of left field. In the same way that Jim Knowles to Oklahoma was kind of like a news thrown out of left field, like Matt Patricia's name was kind of thrown out of left field. And obviously ended up building up steam. And Ryan Day, 7 games into Matt Patricia's tenure at Ohio State, Ryan Day's calling that a home run hire. So everything happened super quick, and somehow it worked out perfectly for Ohio State.
Yeah, I remember after the national championship game, I'm just walking around, just like taking in the scenery. All the coaches, everybody who's actually associated with Ohio State was inside the bubble. And then here's Jim Knowles with, I think, some of his family outside the bubble. And I remember going up to him and like, you don't want to celebrate the team? He's like, I'll let them have it. And that's, some of that is personality. I don't want to take people to take that as like, oh, that was a sign. It was just, no, that's personality. But it always did kind of feel like, from a personality standpoint, he didn't always mesh, even if he was very, very good at his job. You don't want to take that away from him. You said it was quick. Not entirely true, right? Like the hiring of Matt Patricia, Andrew, was not actually that quick. It took like a month. Even Ryan Day admitted that. I don't know, during that month, let's go back, because obviously hindsight, great process, great decision, everything's amazing. Ohio State's amazing, there's nothing wrong with Ohio State. But in that moment, did you ever think, like, why is this taking so long?
That's a good question. I think maybe a little bit, because one of the things, going back to what Stefan was saying, that we all kind of went, oh, interesting, was when Ryan Day called Matt Guerrieri a rising star in the industry at that national championship celebration. So, because you got to remember where we were at. We're standing on the field at Ohio Stadium. We all know, all of the reporters are in one area. We all know that Jim Knowles is not there. Nobody's seen him. We all have heard these reports now for a couple of days, and we're all starting to kind of piece the puzzle together. And then Ryan Day says that thing with Guerreri, and you go, is this just a promotion waiting to happen? Why is he kind of dragging his feet? And I think there was part of that, but I think there was an element of, why is this taking so long? But I also understand that Ryan Day, for as much as we can say there was all this problem with, you were the last to the buffet line, right? You were the last to the, to get the food and say, like, this is who I want. Everybody had kind of picked their spots. You were able to say, well, we kind of have the whole, we have the whole floor open to us. We can go interview whoever is interested in this job, because everybody else is kind of full. Like, Notre Dame needed a defensive coordinator because Al Golden left right after the national championship game as well. Penn State had just hired Knowles. Oklahoma needed to fill, but like there weren't many openings by that point. So Ohio State kind of had their time. So I think it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, I think this is probably something that we thought would maybe be wrapped up a little bit sooner. We wondered if Guerreri was going to get that promotion. We wondered if there was going to be, whenever this happens, it feels like everybody just goes, who's the most famous former player that is now a coach that can be the coordinator? And it feels like everybody just kind of did that. They went,
felt really subtle.
Yeah, whatever. Tim Walton. Maybe Tim Walton. And maybe he can be the defensive coordinator. Maybe he can get promoted. Is Laurinaitis ready? Is Guerreri ready? It felt like everybody just kind of looked at that, and everybody just kind of like looked around and went, is there somebody out there that maybe you could take from a Chip Kelly role, right? Maybe you could hire somebody from the NFL ranks. But it just kind of felt like Guerreri was going to be the guy, and I think Ryan Day just took his time because he knew he had time. So I think it at the time it probably felt a little rushed, not a little rushed. But I think looking back at it, Ryan Day probably did the right thing in terms of taking that time, because it obviously worked out.
That's not the only decision that, at least publicly, took some time though, right? And Chip Kelly also left. He just happened to be at the celebration, so nobody made a big deal about it. But he also left. He just went to the NFL and not to a division rival, which Ryan Day also said, like, that's just more like the NFL, where guys leave for rivals all the time. That's a normal thing, right? But Brian Hartline did get the job eventually. But now Brian Hartline, who has already been living in this world of, like, when is Brian Hartline going to leave? When you look at the coaching carousel right now, it's probably even more louder than it's ever been of, like, hey, how much longer is Brian Hartline going to be at Ohio State? Which includes, again, the team they're playing on Saturday. Maybe they hire them, maybe they don't. This is not me reporting anything. This is just every job in the country is apparently open. A new job opens every week because everybody's terrible except for Ohio State, Texas A&M, and Indiana, apparently. Is there anything Ryan Day could take from how he handled last year when you're trying to win a national championship? You're trying to put together a recruiting class. You're trying to go through the transfer portal and add guys for your next class. But also, your coordinators are actively leaving. Is there anything that he can use from that approach that maybe can apply this year when Matt Patricia, we don't know how long he's going to be here, right? But also Brian Hartline is a rising star as a assistant coach in college football.
Yeah, there's a lot that you could take from it, and it kind of goes big picture in terms of, like, the process of hiring guys. I think Ryan Day is learning that it's not as simple as a thing or two, right? Like, he talked about how early in his tenure, maybe it's like, I think we see this a lot where it's like, well, you can't fire Billy Napier. Look at the recruiting class, David. Okay, you're going to get players. You're going to get recruits. You can't think about, like, oh, look at this recruit or that recruit, and have that, kind of be like, oh, let's hire this guy because that means that we can keep this recruit signed, right? So, like, there's so many elements to it. And I think for Ryan Day, what he saw, at least with the time when they were, replacing Knowles with Patricia, was he saw a defensive staff that he wanted to keep in place. He wanted Laurinaitis, Larry Johnson, Matt Guerreri, Tim Walton to be here in place. Okay, I got to find someone who can scheme up some football, but also has a personality that can mesh with these guys, as opposed to is going to come in and say, okay, you four are fired, I'm bringing in my four guys, because that's not what Ryan Day wanted. And I think that's what was right for this team, right? You had a lot of turnover. You were losing 8 starters on the defensive side of the ball. You'd like to keep some level of continuity, even if the guy running the defense is changing, right? You have to evaluate that, right? If Brian Hartline leaves, whether it's the Penn State job, whether it's whatever, I know he was talked about as a candidate at West Virginia last year. Like, if at some point you imagine Brian Hartline is going to get an awesome opportunity, he's going to take it, right? Guys don't stay receivers, coaches, and coordinators for forever. If they want a head coaching job, they're going to take it at some point. Okay, at that point, what Ohio State need from its offensive coordinator? Look at a big picture. When Ryan Day brought in Chip Kelly, that's what they needed. Ryan Day was handing over play calling duties for the first time as a head coach. He needed someone who he can trust. That's why guys like Bill O'Brien and Chip Kelly were the names being mentioned, right? He trusts Brian Hartline, right? They've been together forever. At that time, that wasn't the move yet for him. And then Chip Kelly leaves, and we talked about it on Buckeye Talk last year. Like when Chip Kelly left, it felt like it was all building for like, okay, this is the time now for Brian Hartline to be the offensive coordinator and actually be the play caller. What does that look like at the end of this year? You're gonna have a quarterback who's coming back probably in Julian Sayin next year, barring some decision to transfer. You have Jeremiah Smith coming back, right? You're gonna have stars coming back who are established in the collegiate game. What does that look like? Is that a promotion of Keenan Bailey? Is that a promotion or bringing someone in and keeping Keenan Bailey and Tyler Bowen and guys like that on staff? Is it, like that's the stuff that Ryan has to assess. What's the right move at that given time with what you got? You can't think, hey, I want to make this recruit happy or keep this recruit signed. I got to keep, okay, this guy might transfer. If I like, you have to look at what your team needs at that given point, right? And like when Jim Knowles came in, they kind of needed someone who's going to come in and tear down the wall and be like, starting from scratch, this defense stinks, we got to fix it. And that's what Jim Knowles was always good for. Like we see it at Penn State. It takes a couple of years for the Jim Knowles team to get rolling. That's what Ohio State needed at the time. When Jim Knowles left, Ohio State didn't need someone to come tear down this defense. It needed someone who could come in, work with these assistants that were already on staff, and figure out the best way to utilize guys like Arvell Reese and Caleb Downs, which is what Matt Patricia fit. That's the challenge, whether it's this offseason, whether it's 10 years from now that Brian Hartline leaves. Ryan Day's going to have to assess what is the need at offensive coordinator at that given point. And that's probably something he didn't know how to do 7 years ago when he stepped in as a head coach for the first time. That's something like Urban Meyer knew how to do because Urban Meyer's been coaching for forever. It takes time to learn that. And you look at where Ryan Day is year 7 as a full-time head coach versus where he was in year 1, like it's different.
I think another way of saying that, it's the value of change versus the value of stability. Mm-hmm. Because the Hartline promotion was the value of stability. Like you looked at
change
a little bit, but you looked at this offense from last year and you went, we kind of don't want a lot to change, even if the players are changing, right? New quarterback, 2 new running backs, a new receiver. You lose an NFL first-round pick, and I know this place is just a factory for that. But the tight end room, you bring in Max Clare as a transfer, and you're looking to add to that room. You lose, like last year's offensive line was just a gong show with the injuries that they had, but you lose a lot of NFL players, and now guys are kind of stepping into the same role. And it's like there's a lot of change happening on the offense, but you wanted to keep things maybe a little bit as stable as you could, right? You've got guys coming up the ranks that are going to do that, and you want to have some stability there. With defense, same thing. You're losing a lot of guys to the NFL, but I think he was able to look at that and say, you know what, maybe this is a time for a reset. Maybe this is a time where, hey, we're losing 8 starters to the NFL. Maybe this is how we change how we do things. Like, I think he got asked today, I couldn't hear if it was an Arvell Reese question or a versatility question, but
we all a little bit of both.
It was a little bit of both, but we all remember that Oregon game where they lost 30. They gave up 32 points, almost 500 yards to Oregon, and we looked at this defense and went, what in the world happened to them? Because they just did not play well, and Oregon torched them. And I think it was Nick Saban, like a couple of days later, talked about an antiquated front for Ohio State. And it was like, I think it was just one of those things where you could say, this was good, but a change in messaging was needed, right? You see this all the time in like the NFL, where you go from a head coach who's a player's coach, an offensive-minded guy, a guy who's more laid back, a guy who's a little more chill. And then maybe that doesn't work out after 4 or 5 years, and he goes, go look at who that team hires next. They're bringing in an ass kicker, right? They're bringing in a defensive guy who's going to be rough and tumble, and he's going to be aggressive and all those other things. Sometimes just a change of voice, even if they're same quality, is just such a breath of fresh air. And I think that's also what has happened to this defense. So I think schematically it's changed, but I think it's also kind of knowing that this defense probably needed a little bit different of a voice coaching them, and I think that's one of the reasons why they've been so effective.
So I'm going to try to wrap all this up. Knowles' point, that was a necessary breakup, regardless of who initiated the breakup. 3 years was enough, clearly. Even the way Ryan was answering those questions, Jim Knowles is very good. He's also an acquired taste. Is that a fair way to describe what his relationship was like in this building? I think there's a difference between what you need when you're talking offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, which is why this is such a fascinating conversation. I think with offense, you can maybe be a little bit more picky because your head coach is also an offensive guy, while defensively, it's like that guy has to run things. Ryan Day is not hands-off of the defense. He'll walk in there if he needs to. You mentioned the Oregon game. He walked in there after that game, even if people in the room didn't like that he walked in there. That's his job. He's your boss. He's supposed to walk in the room. But he's not hovering, right? He's not as involved as he is with the offensive game plan. And he'll never be like that. If he was a defensive coach, he'd be on the other side of the ball. He wouldn't be as involved with the offense, which is why he needs the head coach of the defense part of this. I think the need part is what's necessary. The stuff we're talking about, I asked Ryan Day about, like, having the right guys in the right seats and what a team needs at that moment. The recruiting thing, when he said that, Kerry Combs went off in my head. Because the recruiting, especially on the back end of the defense, wasn't great. And, I mean, look at that championship defense. Denzel Burke, Kerry Combs. Jordan Hancock, Kerry Combs. Lathan Ransom was technically Jeff Hafley, but Kerry Combs had the early years of his development because Jeff Hafley was never here when Lathan Ransom was on campus at that point, right? And then obviously Tim Wald's responsible for Davidson Igbinosun and Caleb Downs going down the list there. But you needed to get the personnel right. So even if Kerry Combs wasn't the greatest schemer, he got the right guys in the room. And okay, now you need a schemer. You need somebody to devise a game plan. And you need somebody to tear it all down and build it from scratch. That's where you get Jim Knowles. Now you need a guy who can take what you have now. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just got to keep it spinning. And that's where Ryan Day's program is. I think the stability part you were talking about, there are only 3 dudes in this building who matter that stability long term. And that's Ryan Day, Mick Marotti, and Mark Pantoni. Everybody else is going to be a revolving door at some point. Some people stay a little bit longer. Like Brian Hartline, I think the Penn State or LSU jobs are interesting because he is a hot name. Or is he Kirby Smart, where he sticks around for the right job? The right job for Kirby Smart was going home. Brian can't really go home right now because he's already at home doing a different role right now. But it's been, again, he's 7 years into his head coaching experience, and I think I'm trying to not repeat what you guys said at this point, but it's 7 years in, and you're watching a guy evolve as a head coach, as a CEO, and as a guy who hires other people. He said Nick Saban's name. I didn't say it. He said it. He said it. He said it. He said the Saban thing is happening. The Saban thing is happening. Slowly but surely. That doesn't mean he's going to end up with 6 rings, but you can see him applying Saban philosophy to his own program and putting his own spin on it. 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. And we'll continue to have this conversation on Buckeye Talk, so go listen to that wherever you find podcasts. Ohio State plays Penn State, which is no longer the matchup game we thought it was going to be, which is why we're having big picture conversations about the guy who used to work for Ryan Day going up against the guy that now works for Ryan Day. I'm Steven, that's Stefan. That's Andrew. See ya.